everybody. What's up? Welcome to the Let Go, Let God podcast. I have my guest, Joshua Royal, with me today, and I will introduce him in just a second. I am just going to start us off with our prayer. Dear Father, I thank you so much for this beautiful day. I thank you for this conversation that Joshua and I are about to have. I just pray that you come into this conversation and just, let yourself flow throughout whatever it is that you want us to say, Lord. I just pray that you bring about any topics or any questions or any comments that you want us to talk about, Lord. I thank you so much for continuing to bring guests onto this podcast. And I just pray that it reaches those that you want it to, Lord. And in your name I pray. Amen. All right. So I am going to introduce Joshua Royal. He lives in Orange County, California, with his wife, Hannah. And you guys have been married for, was it 4 years, you said?
Mhm.
Okay. Very cool. And he is one of the worship pastors at Calvary Church in Santa Ana. And then he also works for a nonprofit called Likewise Worship, where he helps worship leaders just kind of not reach their burnout point. Is that right?
Yeah.
Really cool. I actually had never heard of that. And I was like, oh,
Oh, yeah.
yeah,
Awesome.
very cool. And also he just came out with a song called How Firm a Foundation. So it's really like groovy and fun and vibey. So you guys should listen to it. I'll definitely link it below. um, I know this song is very popular, and so you kind of put on your own twist to it. So what inspired you to do that?
Yeah. So I think one of the main things that I've learned as a worship leader over the last several years is just to have a value for obviously bringing in new songs and pushing things forward, but also having an appreciation for what came before us. My mentor who kind of taught me how to lead worship, his name's Justin Unger. He really instilled that value in me. And when I would lead worship with him, we would do new takes on older hymns all of the time. And so I figured as I'm starting to write music of my own and create projects that I'm working on, I want to keep holding on to that value. And so I thought this would be a really cool way to do that, to bring attention to an older song that a lot of the generations before ours would appreciate, and then also teach it to our current generations and the one after us, and just kind of keep that theme and that truth about the Lord alive, that he's a firm foundation. And so yeah, that was kind of the heart behind it.
I love that because I feel like I've heard a lot of people say, like we never sing hymns in church anymore. It's like we forget about those songs and they're so good. And so I think always remembering them too, going back to that is good to keep going.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
is there gonna be an album soon? Are you working on some stuff?
Yeah, yeah, so my producer and I, we started writing songs together coming up on 3 years ago. And for the last 3 years we've just been writing and taking trips to Nashville and writing with some people out there. And we're about, I don't know, somewhere between like 16 and 17 songs deep right now. And so we're kind of now in the process of figuring out what are the songs that we really like, what resonate the most with the direction that we're trying to go in. And we're just gonna start releasing stuff. It'll start one by one. Eventually, there will definitely be a full length album. There might be a smaller, like 5 to 6 song EP in between. But yeah, we're just kind of taking it one song at a time right now and seeing which ones the Lord highlights for us. And yeah, so that's kind of the plan right now.
Yeah, very cool. Exciting stuff. I'm excited to hear more. It's like I love when I hear a new song, but then I'm also like, oh man, I have to wait for more to come out. So it's the
Yeah,
anticipation, but I guess that's the point. So, you
for
know.
sure.
So I want to go ahead and just jump right into the main question of the podcast.
Mm.
So What would you say has been a life-changing lesson that the Lord has taught you?
Yeah. So for me, I grew up in a background and in a family where Christ was of the utmost importance. There was no denying that. We were a family that implemented him in everything that we did. We were a church, every Wednesday, every Sunday type of family. My mom taught Sunday school for the entry kids for like 25 years at the church that I grew up at. And so my dad would teach like adult Sunday school classes and all of that. So we were very involved, worship team and all the rest. Um, and both my family upbringing as well as my church upbringing was one that it really valued um, it really valued obedience above all things. It was very much so a we follow God's commands because He is God and He is worthy of our allegiance and devotion. And I'm not denying that. That's obviously extremely important. Um, but what I found is that honing in on the obedience piece alone, it created a very black and white system of religion and of Christianity for me, and it ended up putting me in this place where I had this longing and desire to find the clear right answer for every single thing that involved my walk with the Lord. And I think at its core, I think that's a good thing to want. Obviously, for us and for the listeners of this podcast, I'm guessing all of us have this desire to be where the Lord wants us to be and to walk with Him in everything that we're doing. But it ended up resulting in me putting Christ in very limited boxes, very limited
Mm,
spaces.
yeah.
Um, whether it was a lack of life experience and knowledge, or whether it was a very narrow understanding of His word and his scriptures and what He was really trying to communicate. Um, and what I found in adulthood thus far, um, is that a lot of times Jesus is in the gray. And what I mean by that is not to say that He's unclear. The Lord is very clear. He walks that perfect tension of truth as well as grace and love that all of us as humans like will try to walk, but either go to one side or the other too extreme, and it's a daily thing. Um, so He's very clear, but He's also um, the thing that I love about Jesus is that He's able to hold multiple things in tension. He was able to walk such a fine line that I think is so uncomfortable for us as human beings, because we like the resolve, we like the wrapped up in a bowness of the things that we have in our life. um but Jesus was okay with tension. He was okay with the idea that, yes, the law called for someone to be put to death, and yet he showed mercy in that moment. He made company with people that, from my observations, a lot of modern day Christians would not give them the time of day. He
Yeah.
associated with a crowd that was very much looked down upon. Um, and so I think for me, how that's played out is where I would tend to gravitate towards a response of judgment or criticism, or finality even. Um, I've been really broken down and softened over the last year, especially just towards, Lord, how do I walk in love towards these situations, towards these people, um, people that maybe aren't cut from the same cloth as I am, or cut from the same belief system as I am. And I know that there are stories and there are radical transformations that happen with people who are just hit in the face with a biblical truth, or and obviously there's the story of um, of the woman at the well where Jesus says, "Go and sin no more," and like that was
Mhm.
just a command. There was no real beating around the bush. It was just this.
Yeah.
Um, but so much more often, I see that people are first introduced to the Lord and are falling in love with Jesus and who He is because of the love that they were first shown, um,
Mhm.
in the midst of not deserving it whatsoever.
Yeah.
Um, and I think the thing that has really turned people off to Christianity, generally speaking, is that it is so truth heavy and lacking in empathy. And
Mhm.
so the tension I've been walking in and the life changing lesson, I guess, to utilize the terminology that you're using, is, Lord, show me how to be a representative of your truth and also your love. And
Yeah.
so many times that has resulted in me having to very uncomfortably relinquish the desire for a clear, Lord, give me the path that I can walk down and have no obstacles with it. Like the black and white,
Mhm.
this is the way I go. There's no obstacles here. Um, the walk with Christ often comes with difficulties and obstacles, and I've learned more and more because that gets preached a lot. Like, oh, life with God is going to come with trials. That's not just personal trials for us that we have to overcome. It's often like mental and emotional and spiritual trials of things that like are in tension and there's no resolve, but that's where Jesus wants us to be sometimes.
Mhm.
Um, and
Yeah.
so that is kind of the line I've been trying to figure out how to walk in this
Yeah.
recent. So
That's so good. I've never really, I mean, I've thought about that, but I've never really thought about it in that sense. Like you used terms, black, white, and gray. And it's so true because as humans, we want to know everything. We want to have control of everything because then we're not as anxious or, whatever that is. And it is good to be in control of things to a certain degree because if you're not, being careful and planning and all that stuff, your life's going to be a little chaotic. But I've realized, especially in my life, the past month or two, I feel like I have like the least amount of control, but I've just surrendered everything. And it's actually so freeing. It's like, wow, I don't need to have all the answers. God will provide what you need and all of that stuff. And so I think just letting go of knowing that you don't have to have all the answers is so good. And living in that gray, like you said, is it can be uncomfortable, but it allows you to depend on God, which is what He ultimately wants, which is so good. Such a
right.
beautiful thing.
And I think you just said a very key word there, which is dependency. Um,
Mhm.
if we had all and I honestly, as I study God's word more and more, and like I recognize how much of a burden that Adam and Eve carried on when they ate the fruit, not just because it was a broken commandment by God, but it was from the knowledge of good and evil. And the more I look at that, the more I recognize what a burden it is to have that knowledge. Because
Yeah.
you start going down all these rabbit holes and figuring out,
Mhm.
okay, what's the best path to the knowledge of good, and like what is the best way to avert yourself from the knowledge and the engagement with evil. Whereas before they ate the fruit, um, there was this unification, there was this harmony and dependency upon the Lord, where it was just like, I don't need to know, I don't have all the answers, I don't want to know all the
Mhm.
answers. Lord, I know you will guide me. And I think getting back to that space of, okay, Lord, how do I lay down all of my religious and experiential priors that have guided me to like certain ways of thinking? How do I lay all that down and simply say, in every single moment, every
Mhm.
conversation, every interaction, just be like, Lord, what do you want out of this? What do you want from me in this moment? And I think walking that space in the gray and in the tension becomes a lot easier when we enter into that space of dependency. So I love that you said that.
Yeah. Oh, that's so good. Such a beautiful picture when you think about the garden and Adam and Eve and just they're just, free spirits like living, just trusting God. And yeah, I think it is a good thing to go back to that too. And so you had mentioned, we kind of get in these cycles in our brain of how to do things and whatnot. And, letting go of that is challenging. What would you say you've done that's kind of helped you break those patterns that you did create in your mind? regarding to this?
Yeah, that's an interesting question because I honestly don't think it's been anything that I've done.
Mm,
I think it's been broken down for me. I think the Lord has allowed me to go through some things that have just wiped out a lot of the priors that I had. Uh,
yeah.
just in the sense of like I don't know whether it's like whether it's politics or religion or just even friendships. Um, there are multiple spaces that we have to walk in as human beings that don't have a clear pathway out. And when we try to carve one ourselves, it results on one side of the spectrum either a total abandonment of like God's truth and commands because we want to be so uh, empathetic and understanding that we just abandon all things to let whatever this is exist,
Mhm.
even if it's evil, even if it's harmful, or we go all the way to this other space of trying so hard to beat in this one way of thinking and operating that we alienate people because we lack the empathy, we lack the understanding. Um, and so I think
Mhm.
for me, it's taken several circumstances and friendships that have entered my life that I entered into it thinking one way, and in order to love that person or to experience love from that person, because experiencing love was a whole other thing that I had to grasp. And I think maybe a clear answer to your question was how do I learn to lay down some of those things and become dependent? It's first experiencing that he loved me first, even when
Mhm.
I wasn't deserving of it.
Yeah.
Um, I think one of the core reasons why it's so easy for us to get really locked in and even prideful about some of the ways that we do things is because we forgot just how broken we are.
Yeah.
Um, and I don't say that as a call for live in this, you know, 24/7 I'm a worthless person and like
Yeah.
nothing. Like I think the Lord created us to, you know, be uh to love ourselves and to enjoy life more than that. But um my ability to become more dependent and I guess loving in certain circumstances is recognizing just how loved I was. Um, and
Yeah.
it took me a long time to get to a place of being able to love myself.
Mm.
When you don't love yourself, you can't love other people very well.
Yeah. So true.
Operate out of this place of brokenness, and I think a lot of what happens, especially for those of us that grew up in the very like obedience driven culture, is you you start to develop this mindset that you're loved by God because you are a good servant, that you obey well. And it's
Yeah. With
and
your actions.
yeah.
Yeah.
And when you start developing that identity, you start projecting that identity onto other people and say, "Well, I'm really good at following God's commands, so you could be too if you just did X, Y, Z." And I think so much the picture of Mary and Martha comes to mind. Of
Mhm.
Martha's just going around fixing all these things in the house, preparing things, and she gets mad at Mary for not helping her, and she even like implores Jesus to like tell Mary to help her, and he simply says, "No, Mary has chosen what is better. Mary has chosen to just sit with me and be in the presence and just commune with me." And I think so much of what's changed for me is, Lord, how do I stop performing for you and how do I just be with you? Um,
Mhm.
and it is many times in the spaces of just being that he gives us the grace and the ability to walk in the direction he actually wants us to go in.
Yeah. Oh, that's so good. I love that. Like, that there was so much to soak in there. You
Sorry, that
guys
was
might
my
need to
heart.
rewind it back. Yeah, take some notes. Man, yeah, that's so good and so well said too, and I think it gives you I mean, my brain is like I feel like the wheels in my brain are turning, and I'm like, "Wow, yeah," like, really think about that, and, you do have to love yourself, and remembering how much God loves you too, it's just like, okay, it's like, think about all the things that you've done and God has never stopped loving you. And it's like, we really should be, showing that and putting that on other people as well too. And it's not easy all the time. Really not easy, but we definitely should be doing it. So my next question for you is, where is an area that you feel as though you've found freedom in?
Yeah. Um, I think just in the idea that God never asked me to change me. Um, like I said, that growing up in that environment where good behavior was just revered above all others, um, most of my life has been spent on putting attention on how do I transform my my behavioral patterns. Um, and the reality that I've come to grips with is just that if I had the ability and my own strength to do that, then I wouldn't have needed Christ, which
Yeah.
of course I do. We all do. Um,
Mhm.
and so therefore I find freedom, and this is gonna be odd when I say this, but I hope people can follow this for a minute, is that I find freedom in the fact that I'm a sinner. And that I'm not going to be perfect. I don't have the power to transform myself, and so therefore I
Mhm.
am in need of His grace every single day. And in the moments where I I have sinned, um, I I have to find a way to let the grace take hold. I have to let myself be broken down a little bit back to that space of dependency. And I can't say this like adamantly enough. Um, it is the moments where I've been in the broken spaces, especially being like someone in church leadership. Um,
Mhm.
there's kind of this stigma that goes around with like the rest of the church that you're this person that kind of has it all figured out, and that's just not the case. Um,
Yeah.
but when you're in that environment long enough, you start to get convinced that that's what you're supposed to be. And so
Mhm.
you can ultimately become detached from the fact that you're a sinner, and that results either in narcissism and just carrying on with yourself like you are this saintly person, uh,
Yeah.
or it results in you being so crippled by your sin that you just spiral out, and you ultimately just walk away because it becomes so burdensome to try and walk that perfect line. And
Yeah.
so I think the lane that the Lord has me in right now, at least, and I think probably for the foreseeable future, is that there is actually freedom in the fact that I'm not perfect. Um,
Mhm.
and that freedom ultimately comes because Jesus took on that imperfection, that sin, and covered it and made a way. And I will say that it like the moments where I've been so broken down, where I've finally just come to this place of, Lord, I have nothing to give you right now. I have nothing to offer.
Mhm.
I've led a handful of worship sets where the week I had prior to that, just coming at like my own behavior, my own tendencies, my mental space, like we're just not in line with the Lord at all. And finally just reaching this place of, God, I have nothing to give you or give these
Mhm.
people, so you really got to come through. Like if I can just be a vessel for you to do whatever you're trying to do, I don't
Yeah.
want to get in the way of that. Um, that's ultimately where I've seen the most breakthrough.
Mhm.
Um, and so I'm grateful for the freedom that comes in relinquishing the effort to be perfect. And as backwards as it sounds, the more you begin to relinquish the idea that you have the power to walk like he did,
Mhm.
the more you will actually walk like he did, because you become more dependent on him, and he's there to guide and um give you the tools necessary to step into the spaces that he wants you to. We've seen a significant shift in our church during our times of worship recently. And it's ultimately the Lord, but I noticed the posture shift for me has just been God, more than any musical or speaking moment that I could craft, like
Mhm.
one moment in your presence would be more powerful than all of that. And so
Yeah, it's so good.
how do we create space for that? And it's resulted in me sometimes standing up there looking ridiculous, because there'll be moments in our services where I will just wait for like
Mhm.
30 seconds to a minute without saying or singing anything. And I'll just wait because I feel like the Lord wants to do something. It's hanging on just
Mhm.
past the point of awkwardness that he's finally like, okay, here we go. And
Yeah,
there's a word that happens, or someone comes forward for prayer or something.
yeah,
So yeah, I think the freedom is independency.
yeah. That ties in really well with what we were talking about earlier with just letting go of that control too. It's like letting go of that control, letting go of this, you know, label or stigma that you have to be perfect or good, especially in a position like you're in when you're in ministry. You are looked at as obviously a leader, and people a lot of the times people will look at you and be like, "Oh, well, you shouldn't be doing anything wrong." And of course you're doing your best, but you are human
Right.
and we all make mistakes. We all say things that we maybe shouldn't have said or do things that we maybe shouldn't have done. But it's you know God gives us so much grace, and just being able to let go of that, it is so freeing. And so I'm glad that you're able to realize that. And you're right, when you do realize that, it's like that's when big things happen and big changes happen. It's not necessarily something that you do, it can almost just be something that you realize, like some revelation, and God's like, yeah, like, why are you stressing about this? So, like, the
It,
whole concept of freedom, I just think about, whenever we become children of God, we are already free from all the things, but it's like we do have to put in the work to kind of like feel that and all that stuff. Because even though we may not feel free, we are, if that makes
yeah.
sense. So,
Yeah. I love that the Lord has me walking in this like just hyper awareness of this kind of stuff right when we're having a conversation, because I feel like that theme is kind of wrapped up in the title of your podcast, right? Just
let
like
go, let God. Yeah.
yeah,
Yes.
awesome.
And as you were sharing that, I kind of want to skip ahead because I was just thinking about this next question. Um, the question that just talks about like challenge in your life. And I think that what we were just talking about, and just in the church and ministry and all that stuff, um, this has actually been brought up a lot in my life the past few weeks. And I feel a lot needs to be said in this. And so I think if we can kind of talk about it, it'll be good. So I I'll start by asking you, what is a challenge in your life that you're facing right now, and then we'll kind of go off of there because I have some things that I want to share, but I want to hear from you as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so a challenge that I've been really trying to walk through and navigate, um, I would say the last year especially, um, has just been the fact that my love and my zeal for the Lord and seeing wanting to see his rule and reign on the earth, and in the hearts of people, um, that love is at war with another spirit of just apathy and cynicism, um, towards the body of Christ as a whole,
Mhm.
um, towards the church and the people of the church. Um, and it's ironic because I'm, as I said earlier, I'm kind of in the space of like, okay, Lord, how do I not get so fixated on behavior and
Mhm.
obedience? And how do I walk more in love? And I think in my mind, I apply that more towards people who are not within the church. I apply that towards people who are like, either not believers of God, or might have a different belief system to me, like trying to apply that there. And yet I'm so reticent, and in fact easily shifted the other way
Yeah.
for people within the church. Um,
Mhm.
because I think, and I part of me part of me says that's my cynicism, and there's another part of me that thinks no, I think maybe God is in that a little bit of wanting to see his people represent him well.
Right.
I think his heart is broken when people in the church do sinful things in his name. And I think that's why I have a harder time applying that, because when people sin against you, um, and they're not believers of the Lord and not in his kingdom, you sort of come to expect that. It's like, okay,
Mhm.
yeah, that will be what it will be. Um, but when there are people who, um, whether subconsciously or consciously and actively set out to hurt you or manipulate you, manipulate a congregation, whatever it is, and they're doing it under the guise of God told me to do this. Uh,
Mhm.
I think that is on another level of just awful, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
And so I think being in being in ministry over the last, I don't know, 7, 8 years, and 5 of those years being like full-time ministry, um, I've started to see the underbelly a little bit of,
Mhm.
kind of pulling away of that own fabrication in my mind of like, oh yeah, people who work at a church, it's supposed to be this utopian vibe and everyone loves Jesus.
Mhm.
Like, just realizing, oh, that's not a thing. Like churches are still run by people, which means it's broken, um, in
Yeah.
one form or another. Um, and so I thank the Lord that I've come out of some of the experiences that have happened to me. I've come out of that scarred, but not broken, not
Yeah.
totally shattered. I can't say that for everyone in my life. I know there's a lot of people, including people that are very, very close to me, um,
Mhm.
who are extremely hurt by the church. And I know church hurt is like this hot button topic right now, but I think it is a hot topic because people are finally starting to like get bold enough to talk about it.
Yeah.
And I think it's a moment that, you know, don't take everything at face value, because I know there are people who will want to latch on. There are
Mhm.
people with agendas of all kinds, and there is a category of people that have an agenda to take the people who have been wounded by the church and amplify it for personal gain. And so I recognize that.
Yeah.
I also think this is a moment that the church needs to take stock of. Um, take stock of where we've gotten things right, celebrate that,
Mhm.
but also take stock of what are the issues that we've botched over the years. And I'm
Mhm.
not even just talking big issues. I'm just talking day-to-day interactions of like how in what ways of the larger, American church system have we put program over people? Where are we more worried about people attending our gatherings and giving their tithes rather than sitting in the trenches with people? Um, I think like the most fruitful ministry that I have had the privilege of being a part of has been off the stage.
Mm.
And I say that as somebody who sees value in the big gatherings, in the corporate times of worship. Like my heart beats for that, obviously.
Right.
So I'm not knocking that. But so often, it's been in the day to day walking with people, that I've seen the most amount of change and restoration even take place.
Yeah.
And I think again, it all comes down to this very like this desire, this core value we have, which is natural, to have things be simplistic and easy and
Mhm.
black and white. It's very easy for a church to say, "Hey, you're struggling with this thing. We've got a program for that. Come to this class on Tuesday nights or whatever." It's a lot harder to sit down with someone regularly and listen to them, just offload all their
Yeah.
stuff and be a safe space that won't
Right.
that won't cast judgment. And to be a place where they can actually experience the love of the Lord, um, in their brokenness. And so I think my challenge right now is I'm just trying to navigate that, and
Mhm.
I will say that the cynicism piece is one that is just that's not of God, and the Lord is purging that out of me, like day by day, as I keep coming back to this place of Lord. It's like the saying has always bothered me of Lord, I love you, I just hate your church. And it's like, if we
Mm.
think about that, that's like saying to That's like saying to it would be like me saying to my best friend, like, "Oh, dude, I love you, but I can't stand your life." Like that
Yeah.
those statements are not compatible because like the two are one. And the Lord takes the church as his bride and loves her and wants good things for her. And so if I'm to love the Lord, then I'm also to share love for his church and to not give up on the church, and also to recognize that the church has all different sides. There are days
Mhm.
where it's good days and there's other days where it's bridezilla, and
Right.
that's like that's okay. And that's again, it's walking in the tension. And so, but yeah, it's challenging because you have all these things that you experience with the Lord and you want to see happen in the different spaces that you're in, including the church. And when there's not a hunger for that, where there's rather a hunger for being right and being the most, I don't know, the best steward or the best servant or whatever. Like when performance is valued over actual uh, intimacy with the Lord
Yeah.
and um, walking where he wants you to walk, which includes into some difficult places.
Yeah.
Um, that's been tough for me. So yeah.
Yeah. I yeah, and to kind of like wrap up this whole point, I just wanted to touch on a few things like just I wanted to hear your experience and you explain kind of what that was because I think that personally it's been brought up in my life a lot like just the past few weeks where we think that we look at these people who are in the church and we're like, oh, they're supposed to be doing all these things, whatever. And I've volunteered at lots of different churches, and to be honest, I thought that too. And then when I was like in the behind the scenes, I'm like, oh, I kind of was took back, and not because anything was really going wrong. It was just like I expected these people to act a certain way or be a certain way. And it's not that they weren't that way, but it's just it kind of changes your perspective, and it's like, okay, we're all human. Um, you know, we all need God's grace, and it really really breaks my heart whenever people are trying out church for the first time and they have a bad experience. It pains me. But at the end of the day, I think we all need to remember that we can have a bad experience anywhere. We can have a bad experience at a job. We can have a bad experience with a friend, like anything. And it's like we shouldn't just write off the church because we had one bad experience. Um, so also, I think with teachings as well. So, with sermons or with podcasts or with, conversations that we have with other people, I think that we need to have our own discernment, and God tells us that. And I actually wrote this down because I wanted to bring it up, but it's First John 4:1, and it says, "Do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits to see whether they are from God, for many false prophets have gone out into the world." And so just because, you are working at a church or like I'm working at a church or whatever the situation is, it doesn't mean that we're always right because we are humans and we make mistakes. And I feel really led to tell everybody to just pray into discerning whatever God is trying to tell you because there's been times where I'll go to a sermon and I'm like, that didn't really sit right.
Mm,
And it's actually a good thing if you feel that because God wants you to pray into that. And sometimes he'll give you clarity and sometimes he'll be like, yeah, that actually like wasn't from me
mm,
because like you said earlier, nobody is perfect and we all make mistakes. So it would be actually really silly of us to sit here and think that our pastors or our leaders are perfect. And so I think it's just like a huge thing. And even on this podcast, I'm going to have conversations with lots of different people. But if something is said that you don't agree with, it's like, I'm not perfect. You're
right.
not perfect. We're not claiming to be perfect. And so it's like taking that to God ultimately because he will give you that clarity
Yeah.
that you need to hear. And I felt really led to talk about that. And whenever you had brought up that experience, I was like, people need to hear this because we are all humans and we need grace.
And I love that you said that because I think it ties directly into why I think it's why it's so easy for people to just fall into like the black and white thing because
Hmm.
there's a tendency to want to, it's not just about knowing what's right and wrong, but it's offloading the work from yourself. It's saying,
Yeah.
okay, Lord, how do I find the perfect preacher, the perfect community,
Yeah.
small group to tell me all the things I need to know so that my faith, and I don't think it's out of malice. I think it's out of human
Yeah.
nature. It's
Yeah.
it's a place of how do I make this walk as obstacle free and as free flowing as possible. I think that's a natural want. But what you just said, it takes it takes the person sitting in the seat who
Mhm.
may be more apt to just take what they see at face value and
Mhm.
instead be no, they're you yes, like there are pastors and preachers and they give great sermons and churches have great programs and everything else, but there's an activeness in your faith that we have to walk in, that I think will keep us from falling into the space of like, oh, I'm
Yeah.
always on this side of the thing or this side, um, because it transforms that to I want to be where the Lord is, and if I want to know where He is, then I need to constantly be checking in with Him and like
Mhm.
interacting with Him, and it I think like I
Yeah.
I so many people get hung up on the verse where it's like pray without ceasing, and they think they I think the tendency is to think it literally means like, oh, like sit here and like pray like for 12 hours a day. But I think how that's applied in my life is just in every single
Mhm.
space, whether it's listening to a sermon or if it's having a conversation like this, or
Yeah.
with a friend who's dealing with something. I've had several people or several moments where I've been in conversation with people where they'll like be offloading something to me and it's like heavy and I'm just like, Lord, I have no experience
Yeah.
in this space. I have no idea how to field this. Like
Yeah.
you got to show up, man. Like this
Yeah.
is this tough.
Yeah.
So it's even stuff like that where it's
Mhm.
just every moment. And one of our pastors here at the church, her name's Desiree, and she's one of the most, I don't know, just spiritually in tune people that I've ever come across, just with the presence of God. And something that she says all the time is that, um, communication with God is not like, it's not like you pick up a telephone and you call him and you ask
Mhm.
him where he is, or it's like, oh, I need to tell him something, like let me get him on the phone. He's always the one starting the conversation in
Yeah.
every single moment. There are things that he wants to do, there are things he wants to say. And
Mhm.
so it's almost like imagining that your phone is always ringing and just
Mhm.
always being ready to pick up and say like, Lord, what do you want out of this? And the question
Yeah.
that I've grown fond of asking is, Lord, how can I partner with you right now?
Yeah. That's good.
It's conversation, or even if it's not an active thing, like physically, like if you're not the one
Mhm.
talking, if it is like I'm sitting in the seats listening to the sermon, I have no ability to change what's happening, but it's just like, Lord, what do you want from me right now? Do
Yeah.
you want me to wait? You want me to listen? Do you want me to look up a scripture to try and like compare what's being said right now, and etc. So no, I love that you brought.
Yeah. So good. And yeah, to really wrap things up, I would say just like you said, I'm so glad you brought up that intimate one-on-one time with God, because that is where you will get the clearest answers, and they still might be gray, but you're going to feel the best whenever you're just going to God one-on-one.
Mhm.
And then asking him, inviting him into every space. I love how you said that. And the more that you do that, the more you're going to be able to discern his voice, and it's going to get louder, and he's going to make more things clear for you. So you will be able to hear things and be like, hey, that doesn't sound super right. I'm going to like look into that and get curious, because God wants you to get curious. And so, man, all that stuff is so good. Oh, we literally could talk about so many other things, but unfortunately, we are out of time. But I thank you so much for coming on. I
Yeah.
That was a great conversation, and I think a lot of people are going to get some really good stuff out of it. And I'm going to link all of Joshua's music stuff below so you guys can stay tuned and listen to the good jams whenever they come out. But yes, thank you so much again for coming on, and we will see you guys on the next episode.